Hello, Alex here, and in this video I want to share my review of the SMC Takumar. That's the older version of the 105mm f2.4 lens for the Pentax 6.7 system. I don't own this lens anymore, but I swear this banana will make sense in a minute. Let's get into it. The venerable and maybe overhyped 105mm f2.4. This lens is honestly the reason a lot of people buy a Pentax 6.7 camera. A camera with this lens is worth so much more than just the body on its own. The bodies alone can go for rock bottom prices if they don't have this lens. Obviously, a fast nifty-50 kind of equivalent isn't going to appeal to everybody, but if it does, it's definitely one of the most highly regarded lenses of that type for any medium format camera. The lens is just 60mm long and it extends by about another 15mm when you're focusing at its minimum focus distance. It's about 92mm wide at the widest, which is around the aperture ring at the base, but it tapers quite severely towards the front element. So even though the dimensions make it sound quite similar to the 45mm f4, the fact that it's so much narrower towards the front element means it is quite noticeably smaller in the hand. It will fit any of the Pentax 6.7 system cameras using the inner bayonet mount and can be adapted to many other systems using an appropriate adapter. The lens weighs in at a hefty 630 grams, which is quite a lot given its size, but reasonable given the maximum aperture and focal length. This is a prime lens, meaning it does not zoom, and it has a fixed focal length of 105mm. When mounted to a Pentax 6.7 system camera shooting 6x7 images, it is roughly equivalent to a 52mm lens on a 35mm camera if using the vertical field of view, or if you use the diagonal field of view, it's like taking a 5:4 crop of a 45mm lens on a 35mm camera. Like most Pentax 6.7 system lenses, there are three variants. The Super Takumars, which are single-coated, the SMC Takumars, which are multi-coated, and then the SMC Pentaxes, which are the newest generation that have the plastic body and I believe are optically identical in all cases, but just that plastic build shaves off a little bit of weight, only about 30 grams in the case of this lens. The optical construction consists of 6 elements in 5 groups, and one of these elements is doped with I think 40% thorium dioxide mixed in with the silicon dioxide. This makes that lens element radioactive, which is a bit strange. The reason for this is that it improves the refractive index of that particular element, allowing for a simpler, more cost-effective optical formula, something that can be manufactured in a reasonable way without hand-ground spherical glass elements, which just wouldn't have been as practical in the early 70s when this lens was new. So it's a reasonable compromise at the cost of some light radioactivity. Now we explain the prop. Realistically, the amount of radioactivity is not something people need to be concerned about, and I'm pushing this earlier in the video just in case people drop off as the video goes on. It's alpha decay, which is incredibly easily blocked. Like, the fact that there's a lens cap on the front of the lens or a camera behind the lens means all of that radiation is being blocked. And the particular isotope of thorium in the thorium dioxide has such an incredibly long half-life of about 15 billion years that although the level of radioactivity is measurable, it's negligible unless you're gonna break the glass, grind it up and snort it or like put it all over your face. You're probably going to ingest more radiation by eating a banana. The front filter thread is 67mm in diameter, which is the closest thing to a standard size in the Pentax 6.7 lineup, as I've mentioned before, and the front element doesn't rotate, so you can use circular polarizers and the like without any fuss. As with all lenses for the Pentax 6.7 system, the lens is manual focus only, and the large fluted metal focusing ring turns very smoothly with quite a good amount of resistance. It's a bit tighter than my 45mm f4 was, but not so tight that it was problematic in any way. I forgot to measure it before selling the camera and lens, but I think it was about a 180-ish degree focus throw, which is decent but not mind-blowing, especially when focusing at closer focusing distances. The minimum focusing distance of the lens is just 1 meter, which gives you a maximum magnification of 0.14x, or a maximum reproduction ratio of 1:7.1. The aperture ranges from a class-leading in the 6/7 format f2.4 at the widest down to f22 at the darkest. f22 is actually pretty good because a lot of very fast lenses will cap out at like f16 at the narrowest, so f22 is nice to have as an option. The physical aperture itself consists of 9 blades which are very slightly curved. From f4 to f22, the aperture closes in half-stop increments, and there is a single increment between f2.4 and f4. I don't know if that's f2.8, f3.2 or whatever. Even if you're not going to use it, having f2.4 as an option is fantastic because it means composing is very easy because so much light is coming through the lens. If you do want to use it, great, you can shoot in lower light or with shallower depth of field, but even if you're shooting at f11, nailing critical focus is just easier when you have such a bright viewfinder, especially if using the TTL prism as I had, which is quite a bit darker than the non-TTL, non-metered prism. When stopped down, the lens is incredibly sharp. It's not that it's soft wide open, but the depth of field is so narrow that there's not a lot in focus anyway. When you are stopped down, it is sharp from corner to corner, and the general optical quality as well is fantastic. There's minimal distortion, which in real world shooting is not an issue. Chromatic aberration is basically non-existent, presumably because of that thoriated element, and vignetting is generally very well controlled. The rendering of the out of focus areas of your images, which is admittedly a very important thing for the standard use case for such a lens, is generally absolutely fantastic. There's no onion ringing, the bokeh is very rarely busy, and everything is just a bit smooth. There is some very slight mechanical vignetting or cat's eye bokeh, which does, I guess you could say, emphasize your subject a little bit. But other than that, it's only in the most extreme circumstances where you're very close to your subject and the background is very close to the subject as well, like just behind them, that you get to see some busy, nasty bokeh. But it's very easy to avoid that, and in most situations, the out of focus areas are absolutely smooth and buttery. This last part does technically fall under image quality, but I'm giving it its own point. The lens has absolutely incredible flare resistance. Of any lens I've ever used in 16 odd years of photography, nearly 17, I have never seen a lens that is so resistant to flare. You don't get any loss of contrast, no significant rainbow blobs appearing in the corners of your frame or anything. It is genuinely incredible. There is a lens hood available for this lens, but I would consider that more of a mechanical protective thing than actually necessary or even recommended for the sake of image quality. Aside from the measurable, but again negligible and not worrisome level of radioactivity from the thoriated glass element, this also yellows the glass over time, tinting it slightly and measurably but not significantly reducing the light transmission or t-stop of the lens. It's one of those things where, like a banana, again, there's a certain amount of yellowness that everyone would be fine with, and then there's a certain amount where it's just too much and it's too far gone. You can't use it, you're not comfortable with it. For negative film, it's definitely not a problem, but for slide film, it could be imparting too much warmth into your images, which may not be to your taste. It is possible to use UV light, either with a lamp or leaving it in a windowsill exposed to sunlight for a period of hours or a couple of days to de-yellow the lens. But I've read a few reports, not many, a few, that say that the worse the problem is, the less effective the UV cure is. So it's generally just better to buy a good copy to begin with, which, given how few copies of the lens there are out there, may make it a bit harder to find a good one. Yes, this is a very good lens, but it's very, very desired. Like, it's one of those things where it's almost the film equivalent of a Fuji X100V, where trying to buy one for a fair price is becoming quite difficult. The prices have dropped in recent months given the rising cost of film, but nevertheless, it's not that difficult to find a good condition, not scalped copy of this lens that costs more than what I originally paid for it, a body, TTL prism, and a couple of accessories. It's very, I don't want to say overhyped, but it is very hyped as lenses go. Again, a lot of people buy a Pentax 6.7 just as something they can put this lens on. So that does drive up the prices quite a bit, and for a lot of people, that's going to make this particular lens undesirable compared to other alternatives, which I'll talk about towards the end of the video. The 180-degree focus throw is again okay, but not amazing, especially if you want to shoot at close distances, wide open quite often. Triply so if you want to shoot portraits rather than stills, because the high resolution of the medium format film with such a large negative means it's going to be very unforgiving of critical focusing errors, and a longer focus throw would have helped with that, to be honest. Pentax have done it with other lenses like the 200mm f4 I spoke about before, which had nearly a 360-degree focus throw. Why couldn't this lens have had a longer focus throw? So do I like the lens, and when would or wouldn't I recommend it? I do like it. The optical quality is amazing, it handles extremely well, and a fast 50 is something that just works well in my and many other people's kits. Especially with that 5:4 aspect ratio, it is so nice for so many things, if you nail focus. In terms of who should use it, I'll start by saying who shouldn't. If you want something a bit longer, more towards a 70-75mm, kind of 35mm equivalent, look at the 150 or 165mm f2.8 lenses. They're only barely half a stop slower, and the longer focal length means you will get much more significant separation if more like bust and headshot type portraits are what you want to do with the lens. If you want to do close-ups, you have two major options. If you're willing to go a bit longer and slower with the aperture, the 135mm f4 macro is an absolutely incredible lens and very cheap. Much cheaper than the 100mm macro lens for the Pentax 6.7 system. And that lens, it's fine. It's generally not as sexy, but you can focus obviously down to 1:3 or 1:1 with the extension tubes if you want to go to the extreme. If you don't want to go to a more extreme macro like that and you're okay with like 1:5 reproduction ratio, 1:6, I'm not sure exactly what it is, the 90mm f2.8 might be a much better option, because I think that lens focuses down to 45-50 centimeters, significantly closer, and it's only a little bit shorter and a little bit slower. So for shots shot further away, you're not going to get that same beautiful separation from your background. But for anything below probably 2 meters, I think it's comparable to or better than the 105mm f2.4. I truly don't think the lens is grossly overhyped, but the hype has certainly inflated it a little bit above what it deserves based on just its optical performance and its general handling. The lens is genuinely incredible for the most part if you can live with the minimum focus distance and your eyesight is good enough to actually focus accurately. For a lot of people, it's going to be very clearly the wrong choice, and one of those other lenses are going to be better, and you can save a lot of money by buying one of those lenses. You can use that money just for a trip to use your gear, a course, a second lens, or just to save some money. But for the right person, the SMC Takumar 105mm f2.4 or its other variants is going to be an absolutely incredible addition to your kit. That's all I have to say for this video. Hope you found it useful or at least entertaining. Stay safe, and bye-bye for now. If you don't already, follow me on Instagram at Shaka1277 for new pictures every day. If you like this video and enjoy what I do on the channel, please consider subscribing or checking out my Patreon, where the tiers start at just €1 per month.